Today we're discussing true self-talk. We're back at the beach, surfers behind me, they're in their flow, waves behind me. I experience flow and enjoy this conversation with you here at the beach. Today we discuss true self-talk, a simple, precise topic that ideally will be taught in schools all around the world as a foundational subject. Self-talk from the premise of truth, love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. So the individual can experience love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment in, on, and as the outer appearances of life, which is what they truly desire. To discuss this in a way that I trust is beneficial for you, I titled today's conversation Mind Map,
Think from Truth. Today's conversation is an exploration based on personal experience of Lesson 3, which is thinking, hence the title of the mind map, Thinking from Truth, related to Lessons in Truth by Harriet Emily Cady. Recently we explored Lesson 1 and Lesson 2. I'll link in the description to those videos as I share my insights and perspectives from applying what she shared in my personal way. The premise is, this quote here, she says, "We learned in the second lesson that the real substance within everything we see is God, that all things are one and the same Spirit in different degrees of manifestation, that all the various forms of life are just the same as one life, come forth out of the invisible into visible form, that all the intelligence and all the wisdom in the world are God as wisdom in various degrees of manifestation, that all the love which people feel and express toward others is just a little, so to speak, of God as love come into visibility through the human form." I would like to relate this over to the 7 stages of spiritual alchemy. We have had a number of conversations on the 7 stages of spiritual alchemy, which articulates what appears as the journey to realizing truth, knowing that fundamental reality is, as she articulated here, God experienced as love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. And from this premise, the individual that appears plays a harmonious role. All are in harmony and in contribution with the individual's role, which we can call definite major purpose in life. And the individual is also in harmony with the definite major purpose of all. It is experienced as all in harmony, thus experiencing fundamental reality as love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. And thus, when relating with people, as we discuss in our Neville Goddard conversation, we literally mediate God to them by imagining them loving. She says, but someone else will say, if all the mind there is God, then how can I think wrong thoughts or have any but God's thoughts? If you turn your thoughts away from the external toward the spiritual and let them dwell on the good in yourself and in others, all the apparent evil will first drop out of your thoughts and then out of your life. Paul understood this when he wrote to the Philippians, "Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honorable, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good rapport, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things." So, as we've been discussing, mind purification occurs on the journey to actualizing the vision, the desires of the heart God gives and fulfills the desires of the heart. When I look back at my experiences, everything related harmoniously to where I appear to be now, and continues to do so. Whatever vision I set since I read Think and Grow Rich in 2004 had been actualized, and also mind had been purified from the untrue beliefs. The untrue beliefs being not from the premise of love, not from the premise of happiness, not from the premise of peace, not from the premise of fulfillment, not from the premise of bliss, not from the premise of prosperity. In other words, not from the premise of true nature, being love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, prosperity. These untrue beliefs were released on the journey to actualizing the vision. And this is where we could relate this over to the 7 stages of spiritual alchemy. So what I did was I took some of the quotes in this particular lesson and I related them over to the 7 stages. Let's explore. The first we have calcination, which is known as the black stage. Black represents chaos, that which is hidden and buried. When an individual receives within the desires from the heart, from the source, and commits to that vision, that which they see themselves already in possession or already experiencing in imagination, what appears as a journey begins and continues as life experiences to actualizing that vision. On that journey, opportunity is presented to bring awareness to the false identity construct, as we discussed in Tuesday's video, which I'll link to in the description, which is made up of beliefs. So the beliefs that the individual has been identified with, that is stored in the subconscious aspect of mind, that's where the beliefs are stored, may be playing out as theater in relationships with people on the journey to actualizing the vision. To purify the subconscious mind from these untrue beliefs, we are taught to imagine lovingly, as stated in Philippians 4:8. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honorable, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. This is so that we can experience a flow-based, blissful journey to actualizing our definite major purpose. And what I found was that with each of these definite chief aims that were actualized, materialized, manifested into form over the years, mind became purified and my purpose became clear. And I was being purposeful on the journey to actualizing each of those definite chief aims. In my corporate career, in my consulting business, in my personal relationships, romantic relationships. And what I noticed is that everyone that appeared, what I was appearing to do was to be in harmony with their vision. I noticed that the services that I was providing, the products that I was creating, the conversations that I was having were mutually beneficial. They were beneficial for them, they were beneficial for me, and as operating from the premise of truth more so, what I appeared to do was be in harmony with all. Now, this started to make more sense on the journey to actualizing these visions, because what was occurring was well articulated in the 7 stages of spiritual alchemy. So, consider this. As she states, God is all good, always love. If the individual has an inharmonious relationship with the word God, the source, they may think that God inaccurately is not love, not happiness, not peace, not bliss, not fulfillment, and thus imagine separation and think inaccurately from identification to untrue beliefs. So, on the journey to actualizing the vision, we may be presented revelation of identification to these untrue beliefs, which, for example, in conversations, in relationships, could appear as fear of judgment, imposter syndrome, fear of rejection, perceived lack of worth. The individual comparing themselves to another person, which upon comparison, they think that they're not adequate, that they're not good enough. Fear of conflict. These are untrue beliefs. As she said, God is all good, always love. God never changes, no matter what we do or may have done. The individual's thinking and beliefs may appear to change, yet truly they are one with the Father. I and the Father are one. Thus I transcend the beliefs. But what is the true nature of I? Well, by being still on the journey to actualizing the vision, if reactivity appears, mind is purified. The individual receives within. They receive within what to think in relation to the appearances, which I related to again in Tuesday's video, as guidance from the true inner voice, which I refer to as the holy guardian angel. I'll link in the description to that video. She says, God is always trying to pour more of God through us into visibility so as to make us grander, larger, fuller, freer individuals. Love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. Thoughts of love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment are received within. Is the individual clouding their mind with mental chatter that arises from the untrue beliefs that distort? As she says, God is always trying to pour more of God through us into visibility as to make us grander, larger, fuller, freer individuals. Thoughts from the premise of truth, which we may take and turn into autosuggestions to purify the subconscious mind from the untrue beliefs. She says God is at all times, regardless of our so-called sins, which is missing the mark, not allowing ourselves to be how we truly desire to be, which represents our individual expressions of love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, prosperity. You know what that means to you. You go within and you discover, what does love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, prosperity, which could sound like abstract terms, mean to me, which are gifts, which is also what we truly desire to experience. And thus there's no denying that truly we are destined to experience what we truly desire. She says God is at all times, regardless of the so-called sins, which again, missing the mark, the individual not listening to the inner voice within, trying to pour more good into our lives to make them richer and more successful. While the child is crying out for its father, mother, God, the father, mother is yearning with infinite tenderness to satisfy the child. So the journey starts off with a vision, the commitment to the vision, the desires from the heart. Only God gives and fulfills the desires, each definite chief aim that I committed to. I know certainly it was from the premise of love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, and I actualized it. And on the journey, what occurred? Number 2, dissolution. There may have been inner resistant elements that are brought forth for purification. She says, human mind or intellect makes mistakes because it gathers much information from without. So the individual may be identified with untrue beliefs, which they formed as a result of looking to this world and forming conclusions. Those thoughts then eventually persisted upon that were untrue became beliefs, which generates unnecessary resistance to living how they truly desire to live, to being how they truly desire to be, and no shame and condemnation. They may release identification to these untrue ways of thinking. She says, our way of thinking makes our happiness or unhappiness. So there it is. Very clear. Is it from the premise of happiness? If not, it's an untrue belief. Our success or non-success, we can, by effort, change our ways of thinking. So the effort is simply if on the journey to actualizing your visions, if inner resistance brings awareness to, because that's what resistance does, consider resistance as your friend, bringing awareness to what has been identified with, the untrue beliefs. So you can have a conversation with yourself to release identification to that belief. You receive within the true and accurate way of thinking. You actually receive it within via intuition. This is what happened with me on the journey to actualizing my vision. Certainly, there may be people that appear that reflect the truth. They will reveal the truth and you'll know when you hear it. It may be presented in books, information, conversations, etc. So let's use an example as fear of rejection. One of the things that I noticed on the journey to actualizing my entrepreneurial success was this fear of rejection when it came to client acquisition, starting conversations with people and presenting offers in a way that's mutually beneficial. I offer my product and service, they offer fair compensation. It's such an obvious and harmonious thing, yet in particular moments I saw it as conflict because you could say I was afraid of rejection. There was inner resistance to starting those conversations, to being present in the conversations with those individuals. After the conversations, there was shaming and condemning. If that occurs, the inner resistance, be still. Allow the untrue thoughts to release. Allow the emotions to be exactly like how we articulated in the 7-day mental and emotional diet video that I created. I'll link in the description to it. This moves us into the stage, clearing out all that is inauthentic and not true. We start to see it. What is it meant by living from the premise of truth? Love, happiness, peace, bliss, and fulfillment. I am aware of what I relate to appearances. It's crystal clear as the individual's mind is purified from the untrue beliefs that are stored in the subconscious aspect of mind that they may be persistently identifying with, and their attention goes in the direction to reveal what they are identified with. No shame and condemnation. Now is the time to put off that former self-talk and be renewed in the spirit of the mind. She says, universal mind sees and speaks from within. It is all truth. You may relate this to, again, in Tuesday's video, the Holy Guardian Angel. So again, to emphasize, universal mind sees and speaks from within. It is truth. It speaks from the premise of love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, prosperity. She says, the sun does not radiate life and warmth today, and darkness and chill tomorrow. It cannot, from the nature of its being, nor does God radiate love at one time, while at other times anger, wrath, and displeasure flow from his mind towards us. If the individual thinks that, it is untrue beliefs. Wherever they picked it up from, no shame and condemnation. Release identification to that false, untrue relationship to God. Again, God radiates love unconditionally. And as this continues, we go into conjunction. The individual accepts the parts of the true self, that which is their individualized version of love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, prosperity. Fermentation. The still small voice arises. Clarity. Intuition is crystal clear, as she says here. This is the universal mind which makes no mistake. Still the intellect, for the time being, be still. And being still is experienced easier and easier on the journey as mind is purified from the untrue beliefs. So again, how does one purify the mind from the untrue beliefs? By being still if reactivity or inner resistance is experienced on the journey to actualizing the vision. Again, very precisely articulated in the 7-day mental and emotional diet video, which I'll link to in the description. Mind is purified. You may also generate autosuggestions that you receive within. and repeat them to yourself often to purify the subconscious mind from those untrue beliefs and operate from the premise of truth. The premise of truth, the autosuggestions are received within that are accurate and true, that parallel Philippians 4:8. Again, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honorable, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good rapport, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. By thinking on these things from the premise of truth, mind is purified, and the still small voice arises within and guides accurately and vividly on the journey to actualizing the vision and also the fulfillment of the 7 stages of spiritual alchemy, which we'll talk about in a moment. The realization of the statement experientially she brought up earlier. So fermentation, the still small voice, intuition arises. She says, this is the universal mind, which makes no mistake. Still the intellect for the time being, and let universal mind speak to you. And when it speaks, though it be but a still small voice, 1 Kings 19:12, you will know that what it says is truth. And what I found is universally it speaks from the premise of love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, prosperity. Dissolution occurs. Assimilation, realizations into experience as they flow in via the still small voice. And as mentioned, people may appear to echo the truth as confirmation of having received the truth within. We further acknowledge it. We give gratitude towards it. And as this continues, mind purifies and we experience coagulation, one with God. And inner and outer are experienced as one. They're experienced as one. A person experiences it as flow. I got asked a question the other day. What's the distinction between stillness and flow? I say, I relate them harmoniously together. I am eternally still, for that I know that I am love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. And I flow, I appear to flow, the individual appears to flow to actualizing, manifesting heaven on earth, love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, in harmonious relationship with people, environment, and information. Because, as she said, there is but one mind in the universe. So we actually experience this through what appears as, and you can use the 7 stages of spiritual alchemy to serve as a guide on the journey to actualizing your vision and also mind purification to realizing oneness with God so that it's crystal clear as the untrue beliefs are released, for example, as mentioned in relationship with people, fear of judgment. You unconditionally experience love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. So you don't judge yourself, you don't judge others, you don't shame or condemn. There is no more of an experience of imposter syndrome because you speak authentically from the premise of truth and it flows out of you and you do not look for approval or validation unnecessarily, for truth is truth and you experience it and express it accordingly. There is no fear of rejection because, as mentioned earlier, everything is optimization data. Then there's no perceived lack of worth, for you know certainly, created in the perfect image of the Creator, I am love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. Thus, complete, whole, and fulfilled now, beyond the identification of untrue beliefs that spawn thinking patterns and thoughts that are untrue. You realize that those thoughts are untrue. Those thoughts are no longer identified with, and the beliefs are released. And these untrue beliefs, sometimes I refer to them, as you've heard me mention, as false gods, false idols, false prophets. As they are no longer identified with, so do the illusory appearances that are generated from identification to these beliefs dissolve. There's no comparison to others because it is experienced, all is one, as she's articulated here. The real substance within everything we see is God. That is, all things are one and the same spirit in different degrees of manifestation. We can call that the divine play, that all the various forms of life are just the same as one life come forth out of the invisible into visible form. that all the intelligence and all the wisdom in the world are God as wisdom in various degrees of manifestation, that all the love which people feel and express toward others, which is relating ideally from the premise of truth, thus, as Neville Goddard states, imagining lovingly, mediating God to them. So again, that all the love which people feel and express toward others is just a little, so to speak, of God as love come into visibility through the human form. And God is infinite love, infinite happiness, infinite bliss, infinite peace, infinite fulfillment. What she's referring to is more and more so each moment, each day, we experience that more and more so as visible forms. So that is what is referred to as just a little, because we can, and we certainly do. I trust you've been experiencing this as well, as you and I are no different. More and more love each day, more and more happiness, more and more peace, more and more bliss, more and more fulfillment, more and more prosperity each day. And so there is then no comparison to others, because truly, ultimately, there is no other. Thus, there's no fear of conflict. You flow through life. Conversations flow naturally. I notice this in my business, personal relationships, which is distinct to how it was before, because there was a lot of identification to beliefs of separation. And knowing that all is in harmony, there's no need for approval. So what happens is the experience is like a theater, a joyous theatrical play. Everyone shows up in harmony and in contribution, relating ideally with each other. They may appear to have challenges. We assist them with it. We provide products and services that benefit them. They provide fair compensation. If you're in business, in harmonious relationships, there's mutual understanding. Conversations flow naturally, more and more so each day, as we continue to relate ideally from the premise of truth. So I trust you found this video to be helpful. Let's conclude this with an auto-suggestion to further encourage. You can say, I relate ideally from the premise of truth. Think from the premise of truth, knowing that I am love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. Knowing God to be unconditional and infinite love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. I get to experience more and more of God as love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, in, on, and as a harmonious bridge of incidents to actualizing my love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, prosperity in increasing frequency on a continuous basis as far as the senses perceive. If you would like a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk with you soon. Take care.